Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do a little bit of story time. We're going to talk about that time I went on the Young Turks to debate capitalism versus socialism with Dr. Rashad Richey. Let's get into it. First, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, be sure to like, subscribe, turn on the bell notifications. The YouTube algorithm gods, I don't trust them, neither should you. I do a weekly series breaking down big picture issues on our politics on here, and I do a lot of bonus content like this video. So, now let's get into my debate on the Young Turks discussing capitalism versus socialism. I was invited on by Dr. Rashad Richey, who hosts a show called Indisputable on the Young Turks, which is this left-wing YouTube and online streaming network that's pretty massive, actually. He does this segment on his show every week called the Bullpen, where he brings on conservatives and libertarians and debates them head-on about big-picture ideas and policies that are in the news. And I just want to say, everyone over there was super professional, super nice. Really appreciate them having me on. I've complained about this a lot, right? I've done Fox News, Fox Business, all this conservative media, and I never, almost never get invited on liberal or left-leaning media sources. So thank you to Dr. Richey. Thank you to the Young Turks for having me. It was really cool, and we got into a very substantive, long-form debate. The link to it will be in the description, but I'm going to show you some of the highlights. The debate was pretty charged from the get-go, though, I will say, because Dr. Richey brought up as his first question for me, his first argument against capitalism, slavery. Yeah, he didn't exactly pull any punches. He got right into the darkest chapters of American history, saying that that was really all about greed and profit and capitalism. Here's how our exchange went down.
I hear the spin, the positives that people say capitalism creates. Capitalism also creates significant evils. We can look at the operation of slavery, which was all led and created because of a bottom line agenda. The agenda was free labor. And you can look at not only American slavery, but slavery across the planet had an economic core. And that economic core came from capitalism.
Well, let me break that up into two parts, because the first thing that you mentioned was slavery. Slavery was the most evil thing in American history. Horrible. Nobody who supports free market capitalism in the way that I do has any support for any sort of kind of thing like that, because
but the capitalists back then supported slavery. That's my point to you. They were all capitalists.
Capitalism is not the same thing as blind pursuit of profit and wealth. Free market capitalism does require government, a government that protects people's rights from being infringed. It's when the market operates, but within a set of parameters, so that I can't force you to work for me. Key to capitalism is the idea of voluntary transactions. People only agree, I give you $5, you give me a 6-pack of Coca-Cola. It doesn't happen unless I agree to it and you agree to it. So slavery is not capitalism in the way that I believe in it, or anybody really in my movement believes in it. And so what we're talking about is voluntary transactions in a market, and those automatically leave people better off, because if they didn't, people wouldn't agree to them. Hopefully now, after seeing that, you can understand that slavery was not capitalism in any way. Free market capitalism is about voluntary trade and exchange, not coerced labor and injustice. So I thought it was good to get that myth out of the way. And then we got into the minimum wage, which is an issue I'm passionate about, but he's a big proponent of it in the fight for 15, and I say that it does more harm than good. Here was our conflict on that point.
Making an assumption that the alternative is zero. Here's the alternative.
No, the real minimum wage is always zero. It's unemployment.
Okay, listen to me, brother. I want you to hear this. The alternative to your scenario is to have a system that looks at the fairness and how it treats the human capital rather than the monetary capital. So while you have this scenario where, okay, well, $2 an hour is better than $0 an hour, okay? That's your scenario. My scenario is having a system that will not allow $2 an hour is better for the masses in this country than having a system that does. And we're talking about systems today. We're arguing systems.
Yeah, so the problem with how you're framing the system, I think,
is that in order to not allow anybody to have less than $15 an hour, for example, because $2 an hour is below the market rate for labor. So even without any laws, basically nobody would work at that rate.
That's not true.
$15 for an hour. In order to only allow people to work at that rate or above, you have to consign a lot of people to not working at all. It would eliminate millions of jobs, and the costs of it, of a $15 minimum wage, would be passed on to consumers via higher prices. This would also, and I know that you don't support this, right? This would help Amazon and the big corporations. If it was really a pro-worker policy to have a $15 minimum wage, why would Amazon be lobbying Washington to get it done? They know it will crush small businesses and hurt their competitors. It's actually crony capitalism.
What strikes me about the minimum wage exchange is how they don't ever seem to acknowledge that the real minimum wage is always zero. They say, well, why can't we just make everyone have $15 an hour? Well, why can't we make it $100 an hour, right? Well, because requiring people to be paid more than what their labor produces in value, like $100 an hour, would mean that they aren't employed. But if we acknowledge that's true for $100 an hour, it's just as true at $20 an hour or $15 an hour. Dr. Richey also tried to defend socialism by saying that COVID stimulus was a socialist program and it was helping people. And here's how we got into a little bit of a dispute about that.
Now, when you look at socialism, for example, COVID-19 hit, right? COVID-19 hit, you had massive slowdown in the economy. Capitalism did not sustain people. It was socialism. The stimulus checks, textbook definition, socialist program. The guys who are on your side, they're making a debate saying we need to get out of socialism, when in fact they take advantage of socialism in their corporate welfare tax programs, abatements, etc. So they say no for the individual, but yes to them as corporations. Go ahead.
Well, let me start where we agree. I oppose corporate welfare. Republicans are often hypocrites, supporting corporate welfare and then bashing welfare for other people. I oppose all of it. I'm very consistent. I'm happy to acknowledge that hypocrisy. But what you mentioned in terms of those programs are actually a prime example, some of them at least. Let's talk about COVID stimulus you mentioned. Okay. Of how actually the problem was not just COVID-19, it was the government lockdowns that created the economic depression. And then the stimulus programs, there's no such thing as stimulus because they can't create resources out of thin air. They have to tax or take away money from us on one hand to put it somewhere else on the other hand. And the government lost 5 times more money to stimulus fraud than it spent developing the COVID vaccines, at least 5 times more. That was not an efficient program. It didn't help people in the ways that it's often said to. In fact, they have MIT research about the Paycheck Protection Program that shows it was woefully inefficient. Yeah. And these programs, I don't think they were nearly as effective. The stimulus checks were actually a tiny portion of that bill. Huge amounts of the money went to Wall Street and big corporations. So that was, I think, actually a good example of how big government programs end up being more corrupt than they are useful.
If the COVID stimulus is the best example you have of a successful socialist program, you don't have any great examples, my friend. Because Dr. Richey attempted to say that, all those flaws with the stimulus are real, but they are about the idea of socialism. That's just the problem of the execution. I was having none of that.
Now we're making an argument between execution and the idea. The execution was horrible. And what is government supposed to do when there's a significant hit to the common person? They're supposed to get in and say, all those taxes you've been paying, we're gonna put it to good work now. We're gonna put it to good use. So if it was executed better, would you have a better conclusion as to the program?
Yeah, look, if it was executed well, then I would have a different conclusion. But I would actually suggest to you that the execution and the idea cannot be easily separated because the things that ruin the execution are things that are inherent to government intervention in the economy, like politicians being corrupt, We call this public choice economics. The kind of people that become politicians are corrupt, they're ambitious, they're self-interested. And moreover, we call regulatory capture. Whenever there's a big government intervention, the lobbyists shape it in favor of big businesses.
Yeah.
Small businesses barely got anything, they got screwed. And what I would say is that it's not just the execution that always happens with big government. We see it time and time again because it's a centralized group of people in Washington with power trying to plan a whole country. They're gonna make massive mistakes, they're going to botch it, and they're going to be heavily corrupted by outside influences. So you can't separate the execution from the idea, in my opinion.
The truth is, socialism cannot be executed well. It is inherently broken and destructive as an ideology and an economic system. And hopefully, thankfully actually, I was able to reach a lot of people who are left-leaning, many people who were actually African American and not part of my typical audience of readers. I was able to reach them with this message by going on the Young Turks and taking up Dr. Richey's invitation, and for that I am very thankful. I do want to have a little bit of fun and read some of the comments that were on the YouTube video, which had more than 20-something thousand page views. Thankfully, I mean, it made quite a splash, but let's take a look at some of those comments because some of them were kind of funny. That conservative guy's stare is creepy. The bags under his eyes are American Tourister, and it looks like he's got eyeshadow on. Ouch. Why homeboy look like he just hit some strong dope? He also looks like an anime avatar. Okay. This guy just wrote, a vampire on blow? I can't. But more importantly, guys, there was a lot of positive comments and feedback too. Look at some of these. Refreshing to listen to a potentially fractious discussion carried out respectfully with no rudeness, overspeaking, insult, etc. That was the best bullpen I have seen yet. This guy actually has some understanding of the things he's talking about. I don't agree with his hope for our economy, but thank God he has at least 2 brain cells to rub together and come up with a coherent thought. Hey, I have at least 3 brain cells. This brother made me interested in listening to him more. One of the few people that has come on that wasn't just a political hack. It was refreshing to see 2 knowledgeable, prepared people discuss the issues. Great conversation. The guest had some very valid points. LOL, this guest was pretty good. Finally, a worthy opponent. And winner, Brad Palumbo. I'm just saying. But anyway, it was a blast going on. The full link to the video is in the link below. And thank you guys for joining me and indulging me with this debate. I'm very passionate about this, and it's the kind of thing that I'll keep covering on this channel. So make sure to like this video, subscribe, and I'll keep you up to date with all the future debates that I do.